Hello and welcome to video 4 for Unit 2 Cognition. This video will specifically focus on the encoding of memory. By the end of this video, you should be able to answer the following question. How do different encoding processes work to get information into memory? Before we can talk about the different processes of encoding, we need to talk about what encoding is. Encoding is the process of putting new information into long-term memory. Some of this encoding is automatic, and some will require effort to put things into long-term memory. Automatic processing is information that is processed without our conscious awareness. There is so much information that is processed effortlessly by us. For example, space. While reading a textbook, you automatically encode the picture on a page. Time. We unintentionally know when events take place during the day. And frequency. We effortlessly keep track of how often things happen to us. The main point here for automatic processing is that you don't have to rehearse this information to encode it like you do with effortful processing. For instance, you don't have to repeat yourself at lunch, I am in the cafeteria, it is about 12 p.m., and I am having fish sticks and fries. That would be weird. So this information is happening automatically without rehearsal or without effort. Effortful processing, on the other hand, is the type of processing that requires effort. Conscious attention is necessary in order to get it into your long-term memory. Such processing leads to durable and accessible memories. This is the idea of practice makes perfect. And this is when we're learning new information. So how can we enhance our encoding? There are a few different ways for us to enhance this encoding. The first is maintenance rehearsal. Maintenance rehearsal is repeatedly thinking about or verbalizing a piece of information. It's repeating the spelling of a word over and over until you have it in your long-term memory. Elaborative rehearsal is using active thinking and thinking about the meaning of a piece of information. This is what we've done in our class. So in order to learn the structures of the brain, you need to do more than just repeat that structure's name over and over. You have to understand what that structure is, what its function is, and then maybe give yourself a mnemonic device in order to remember that piece of information a little bit more clearly. The final way to enhance your encoding is the self-reference effect, and I have said this multiple times. This is applying information to yourself. If you can make an event or a piece of semantic information really meaningful to you, making an example that applies to your life, you are much more likely to encode that information because you've connected it with something you already remember. Some other effortful processing strategies in order to enhance our encoding include chunking. Chunking is a strategy used in cognitive psychology to improve our memory, where large amounts of information are broken down into smaller, manageable chunks. Remember, there's a magic number of 7 plus or minus 2 items that our short-term memory can hold at once. So chunking is a great way to make the number of items smaller that we need to remember. Here's an example. The first number on the top has 12 digits. Having to remember each one of those digits individually would be too much for our short-term memory to handle. So we can break them down into meaningful chunks that will allow us to encode this information a little bit better. If we break them down into years, for example, now we just need to remember 4 years instead of 12 individual digits. Another way for us to enhance our encoding is using mnemonic devices. We've talked about mnemonics over and over again in my class. The mnemonics are memory aids that may appear to be unusual or artificial, but are based off of the basic principles of learning and memory. The best example of a mnemonic device that you guys have probably always used is PEMDAS, or Please Excuse My Dear Aunt Sally. This stands for the order of operations that we do math equations in. Parentheses, exponent, multiplication, division, addition, and subtraction. Hierarchies are another great way to enhance our encoding. Hierarchies allow us to group different pieces of information into the broadest to the most specific. So we can encode information about dogs or birds a little bit easier if it fits under our schema or our major category that we have. Here's another example of how we remember categories of information. We can look at the different categories of drugs as a whole, and then each of those individual drugs, we can understand its effects on the body because we know the category as a whole. And finally, our last strategy for effortful processing is the method of loci. And this one is a little bit different than you're probably used to. This strategy uses making a memory palace. Oftentimes, this palace is like your house, and you define a path that you are walking through that palace or that house. And on that path, you think of a different item or thing that you need to remember in a list along that pathway. Then, as you are trying to remember the list, you aren't just remembering each item individually, you are walking the path of the house in your mind, and you can see each one of those items along the path. Again, this method is a little bit more effortful, but again, we know that effortful processing leads to better recall.